Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing good. Welcome back to the anniversary, my true crime series. This week marks the anniversary of a lot. The death of the man many people believed killed Martin Luther King Jr. He went to the grave denying that he was the assassin. The murder of Jill Dando, who was the presenter of Crime Watch and was killed this week in the 90s. The case that I've decided to focus on is a challenging one for me. It's one that I'm very familiar with, and if you're from the UK especially, you're gonna know it. Today I want to talk to you about Stephen Lawrence, who was killed in London 27 years ago this week. Shwa 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 na na na. On the 22nd of April 1993, the racially motivated murder of Stephen Lawrence, an 18-year-old black boy originally from Plumstead in southeast London, rocked the nation. I think the reason why this story, Stephen's story, hits so deeply is because you know his face, like I know his face. Stephen Lawrence's image is burned into my memory. I'm talking about the one of him standing next to a plant and he's got a striped t-shirt, I believe, on. When this case was fresh and new, it seemed like the media didn't really care. For a case this famous, it's quite hard to believe that the initial articles on the murder were relegated to page 4 of the paper, barely detailing the fact that Stephen and his friend Dwayne, they were 2 black boys, were waiting for a bus in Eltham and 5 white boys appeared across the road. It didn't document the fact that Dwayne screamed at Stephen to run when the gang rushed towards them. The leader pulled something out of his pocket. They didn't tell you that Stephen didn't stand a chance in the attack that lasted between 25 and 50 seconds, which doesn't seem like a long time. And I don't think the papers detail that this was the 3rd murder of a person of colour in the space of a few years by what appeared to be the same gang, who were quite literally getting away with murder. When the death was reported, his family went about painting the correct picture of him. He wasn't a thug, he wasn't involved in gang activity, he was academic, he was sporty. His older brother even said that Stephen was so good at everything that he did, it was a little bit frustrating. He was a budding architect and he spent the last minutes before he died cracking jokes with his mate at a bus stop practicing dance moves. Within hours of Stephen's murder, the police got several tips with the names of the guys who attacked Stephen Lawrence, including a handwritten letter that was left in a phone box. The letter read, "The people responsible are 1. Neil Acorte, 2. David Norris, 3. Jamie Acorte, 4. Gary Dobson." Despite so many people coming forward with tips with the same names, with the same information, one of the detectives on the case, who went by the name of Ian Crampton, is quoted as saying that information isn't evidence, which I completely understand, because, you know, somebody could just ring up Crime Stoppers hotline and be like, oh yeah, Yinka did that. But what's the point in asking for information if you're not going to do anything with this? The Met Police also defended their decision to not proceed with investigating. It ended up being 5, let's just call them thugs, saying that they were juveniles, and if you're going to prosecute juveniles you have to be sure, and blah 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 blah. In the days after Stephen was murdered, liaison officers went to his parents' house, and family liaison officers, for those of you who are not familiar, they're there to just offer help and support and try and get you through a tough time. But that's not what these guys did. They spent their time instead interrogating the Lawrence family about Stephen's gang activity. Almost immediately, about a week after Stephen was killed, his family hired a lawyer called Imran Khan, and he actually ended up representing the family for decades. He constantly wrote letters to the police, you know, he constantly asked about evidence or about prosecution, about suspects, about witnesses, and he was just completely ignored. The suspects were left to do what they wanted when they wanted, which included one of them actually being seen clearing out his house the day after the murder, getting rid of black bags, so God knows what he threw away. 3 days after the murder of Stephen and into the investigation, the team handling his murder was changed, which of course created huge disruption. A lead police officer denied on TV that this was a racial attack, saying that it was a lot more complex than that. But I'm sorry, 2 black boys are at a bus stop by themselves and 5 white boys attack them, screaming racial slurs at them. Okay. It wasn't until May, so a month after Stephen was killed, that Doreen met Nelson Mandela when he came to London. It was during a televised interview that she publicly accused the police of not doing anything to solve Stephen's murder. She said that if Stephen was a white boy, that all the black boys in the area would be rounded up. Coincidentally, the next day the police arrested and searched the suspects' homes, and they took a lot of clothing and other items, including swords and daggers. By July of the same year, charges had been laid and dropped, and apparently the evidence from Dwayne was unreliable. Even though he picked out one of the gang members members of a lineup. It was said that there was insufficient evidence to bring a conviction to any of the suspects. It would take 19 years for only some of the killers to be brought to justice. In 1996, a private prosecution began and it found that there was insignificant evidence and the gang were let go. In 1997, the police investigation seemed to be just static and the suspected killers, they were rocking around as free as pigeons. The Daily Mail published a headline accusing the 5 men of murder. It was public, it was loud, it was potentially illegal, but it was brilliant and they said what everyone was thinking. I think it's safe to say that this reignited public interest in the case once again. I think that everyone knew what was going on. I think everybody knew that there was a lack of an investigation, a lack of direction, but nothing was being done at all. The Lawrence Enquiry, which was launched in 1998, made some shocking discoveries. It found that there was no first aid offered to Stephen on the night that he was stabbed. Actually, the first aid kit wasn't even taken out of the car. Even though Dwayne called an ambulance, they actually sent a police car. They had the same evidence all along from the days after his murder up until they initially arrested the accused. But it wasn't until Doreen's public accusations that they acted upon it. All of the suspects were called to give evidence at the inquest and hundreds of people showed up. It's a public inquiry. It means that any member of the public is allowed to go, but the police would not let them in. There was almost riots outside actually. Neville, Stephen's dad, he went out and kind of gave a speech and was like, don't let them think that we're hooligans, please let there be peace. And people listened until the accused arrived. And I actually remember the photos of these arseholes arriving at the court. They're like they're in the cast of Green Street and they were spitting at the crowd. One of them hit the crowd were hurling abuse at them. It was a complete circus. The report was published in 1999 and it found that there was indeed institutional racism in the Met Police. This is the definition that they gave of institutional racism. There was a collective failure of the police to provide an effective service to people because of their colour or ethnic origin. The report also demanded change in the way the Met was run and the way that police officers were trained, and also recommended that the double jeopardy law be scrapped, which would mean that the killers that were found not guilty would be able to go to trial again. The report basically said that because Stephen was a black boy, from the initial responding officers on the scene who didn't administer him first aid to the killers being able to walk on the street for years, there were failings at every point. But this is how 2 of Stephen's killers were finally brought to justice. It wasn't until May of 2011 that the Court of Appeal agreed that the 1996 acquittal could be quashed in the light of new forensic evidence, and this was from the stuff that the police took from their houses before. Fibres from his t-shirt were found on Gary Dobson's jacket. David Norris's jeans had Stephen's hair and fibres from his trousers on them, and Stephen's blood was also found on the inside of Dobson's jacket, so like in the collar. In this trial, the jury was shown secret footage that had been filmed by the police years before, and this was at one of their houses. And I remember watching this on like a panorama documentary, like a hidden camera. You've got these 5 thugs and they're just laughing and joking about killing people of colour. The language that they're using, well, it's heartbreaking, and they were showing how to stab someone, like this is how you stab someone, and saying they can't wait to do it again. And the thing is, we know that there are people who think like this, but to actually see it when they think that they're not being watched, they're not going to be held accountable for what they're saying, the stuff that comes out of their mouths is just... In 2012, anyway, Dobson and Norris were both found guilty of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, each receiving 15 and 14 years minimum respectively. There were 3 guys who we've got yet to find justice. Will we ever get justice? I don't think so. The Met announced that it was unlikely there'll be any developments in the case. There have been rumours and buzzings online that the investigation is actually closed, but I didn't manage to find anything that confirmed that. And there you have it. It was a difficult one, but we got through it. This week marks the 27th anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. I've put some links to Stephen Lawrence Day, all of the podcast and article links that I used for my research are in the description as well. Thank you for watching. I hope that, not that you enjoyed it, because you can't really enjoy something like this, but hopefully you learned something, or hopefully I did it justice. And I will see you next week for another episode of the anniversary, where hopefully I won't be doing a case that's as close to home as this one.